Assalamualaikum, Pak Zul.
Waalaikumsalam.
Selamat malam, Pak Zul. Sehat, Pak Zul?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah sehat. Gimana Amerika, Pak Zul?
Panas, Pak.
Panas ya? Di sini dingin sekali, Prof. Zul, kalau malam tapi. Alhamdulillah, Prof. Zul ini menjadi kerjasama yang pertama dan untuk selanjutnya, Pak Zul. Nggih.
Insya Allah.
Nah, ini saya baru ketemu Pak Zul. Mudah-mudahan lain waktu bisa kunjungan ke Semarang, kami jemput Pak Zul.
Insya Allah, Pak.
Kami puter-puterkan ke kota lama sebagai kajian media.
Pernah ke
Ini,
sana sekali, Pak.
oh pernah tahun berapa Pak Zul?
2019.
Oh 2019. Berarti baru 5 tahun ya Pak Zul. Nih.
Mhm.
Sekarang sudah beda
Waktu,
Pak Zul.
waktu itu sedang dibangun, kalau nggak salah, daerah kota
Kota
lamanya sedang
lama.
ada banyak renovasi. Ya.
Oh sekarang sudah bagus Pak Zul.
Hmm.
Sudah menarik seperti Belanda masa lalu.
Iya. Saya cuma main ke, apa itu namanya, Lawang Sewu, ya.
Oh Lawang Sewu.
Mhm.
Ya, Jalan Tugu Muda Pak Zul. Ya.
Ya,
Gitu. Tapi sudah pernah berkunjung ke Undip, Pak Zul?
belum pernah.
Oh, belum. Oh,
Hmm.
berarti kenal sama Bu Eta waktu di Amerika ya, Pak Zul ya?
Kita Fulbright barengan tahun 2006.
Oh, oh 2006. Alhamdulillah. Ini ada Bu Yaning. Pagi, Bu Yaning.
Selamat pagi, Zur. Selamat pagi, Pak
Pagi,
Zulkarnain.
Bu.
Kita memanggilnya Pak Zulkarnain.
Ijul aja, Pak.
Wah, kayak
Oh,
Pak Izul, iya.
lebih familiar, Pak Izul.
Pak Izul, oke. Berarti di sana malam ini ya, Pak ya?
Iya, eh 11 jam ya bedanya karena sekarang lagi daylight saving. Biasanya
Ah,
sini
iya.
12 jam.
Mhm. Dan betul-betul summer ya.
Iya. Hai, Ta.
Beda di sana.
Ya, selamat datang. Terima kasih. Terima kasih sudah bersedia untuk menjadi eh, expert kita yang akan bicara tentang close reading, close watching.
You're most welcome.
Mhm. Jadi sedang musim apa di New York? Nggak ada ya. Kalau di sini hampir musim mangga.
Musim anggur kalau summer ya.
Oh, musim anggur. Emang di
Musim
New York?
anggur sama jagung.
Oh, gitu. Right.
Karena saya New Yorknya New York kampung.
Asik ya.
Iya,
Nama musim
dikeliling.
nama musim kampanye ya, Prof. Pak Zul ya.
Iya, iya betul, Pak.
Tes, tes.
Ini alhamdulillah Pak Zul, pesertanya cukup banyak yang sudah daftar di dalam list kami. Ada juga dari Jepang, dari Amerika, mungkin kolega-kolega dari Pak Zul mungkin. Terima kasih ikut dibantu.
Oh gitu ya Pak. Saya
Iya, banyak ini. Mudah-mudahan nanti akan bertambah karena tadi malam sudah tercatat 123. Ini yang masuk
wah,
sudah ya 51. Ini dari program S2 Susastra Pak Izil.
wow.
Mudah-mudahan lain kali kami mohon Pak Izil juga ada joint research dengan Bu Eta, dengan Bu Yaning, dengan Bu Ken, ini ahli-ahli bidang tadi culture ya Mbak Eta ya. Bu Yaning ya, Bu Yaning. Bu Yaning sastra ya, bukan budayanya. Mudah-mudahan nanti bisa direalisasi. Nggih, Prof. Jul, nggih.
Insya Allah. Amin.
Amin, amin. Ini kami nunggu sebentar Pak Izul, Pak Dekan, karena beliau ini dalam perjalanan ke Pemalang. Kami sudah menghubungi beliau. Alhamdulillah beliau sudah. Ini alhamdulillah.
Selamat pagi. Terima kasih.
Selamat pagi Pak
Assalamualaikum Pak
Anam, Pak Dekan.
Iskandar.
Waalaikumsalam Pak.
Selamat pagi Pak Sur. Mohon maaf agak telat masuknya ini.
Ya, enggak apa-apa Pak Dekan, kami tunggu.
Pak.
Terima kasih.
Oke.
Ya, kami deg-degan tadi. Ya. Baik, kita mulai aja. Silakan.
Siap.
Kita mulai aja Pak Dekan.
Monggo, monggo.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, everyone.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
His Excellency, the Dean of Fakultas Ilmu Budaya, Diponegoro University, Prof. Dr. Alamsyah M. Hum, Respectable Dr. M. Suryadi M. Hum, Head of Susastra FIP, Diponegoro University, Honorable Speakers, Iskandar Zulkarnain, PhD from Hilbert and William Smith Colleges, and Eka Farmacelia Nurul Hadi, SSM Hum, MA, PhD from Diponegoro University as speakers, and the honorable lecturers and dear guests. Welcome to this international webinar. First of all, let's thank to the Almighty Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has given us some mercies and blessings so that we can attend this agenda without any troubles and obstacles. Secondly, salawat and salam may always be given to our Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, who who has guided us from the darkness to the lightness. I would like to introduce myself. Rodia Farha Perenia will be your master ceremony this morning. Welcome to today's international webinar on literature and media studies entitled Close Reading, Close Watching, Close Playing, a medium-specific approach in literature and media studies. We would like to thank everyone here for making time to attend this remarkable webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, on this occasion, allow me to introduce you to today's agenda. The first is opening by reciting basmalah. Next is singing Indonesia Raya, and then welcoming speech, and then documentation. The fifth is presentation, and the sixth is closing and also signing implementation arrangement as symbolic sign from the head of the sastra. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let's open this webinar ceremony this morning by reciting basmalah together. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The second agenda is singing Indonesia Raya, and the participants please follow along. Thank you all. And the next agenda would be a welcoming speech, which will be delivered by the Dean of Fakultas Ilmu Budaya Diponegoro University, Prof. Dr. Alam Chah M. Hum. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Mbak Rodia. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi dan salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Excellencies, the honorable guest speakers, Bapak Iskandar Zulkarnain, PhD from Hobart and William Smith College, Ibu Eta Farmasialia, PhD from Universitas Diponegoro, and then the head of the master program in literature, Bapak Dr. M. Suryadi M. Hum, and then the moderator of this event, Dr. Sulkarni Suryaningsih, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our international webinar entitled Close Reading, Close Watching, Close Playing, a medium-specific approach in literature and media studies. It is an honor to have you join us for what promises to be a stimulating and enlightening discussion. Today, we embark on a journey through the intricate and multifaceted world of medium-specific analysis. our focus will be on exploring the nuances of how different media, be it text, film, or interactive format, can be studied through the lenses of close reading, close watching, and close playing. And then in literature and media study, the act of closely engaging with a medium allows us to uncover deeper meaning, hidden pattern, and new insight that may otherwise remain obscure. By honing our analytical skill to address the unique features of each medium, we open new avenues of understanding and interpretation. We are fortunate to have a lineup of distinguished speakers and experts who will share their perspective and research on this compelling topic. And then their contribution will not only enrich our knowledge, but also inspire new approaches in our own scholarly and creative endeavor. I encourage you and aids actively ask questions and exchange ideas. Your participant will contribute significantly to the depth and dynamism of our discussion. And then hopefully our collaboration today will spark enthusiasm to build cooperation in the field of joint research, joint publication, student exchange, double degree, and summer course program. Thank you for being here today. Let us dive into the intricate interplay between medium and message and explore the rich tapestry of possibilities that close reading, watching, and playing offer in the realm of literature and media studies. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof. Dr. Alamsyah M. Hum, for your delightful speech. The next agenda is the main presentation. And before the presentation begins, we'll be documenting this webinar by capturing each slide. And for the participants who haven't turned on the camera, please turn on the camera. We're gonna start to capture the slide. Now the first slide. And then the second slide. And then the third slide. Okay, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, now we proceed to the seminar agenda. This presentation will be delivered by Dr. Farmisilia Nurul Hadi, SSM Hum, MA PhD from Diponegoro University, and Iskandar Zulkarnain, PhD from Hobart and William Smith Colleges. And also, this agenda will be guided by Dr. Suryaningsih M. Hum as the moderator. Let me introduce you to our moderator. She is a lecturer of Fakultas Ilmu Budaya Diponegoro University, and not also being a lecturer, she is also an editor, reviewer, and member of many journals. As we could see through the publication that she published, she's mostly focused on culture, and also we would like to think that she is very suitable for becoming today's moderator and become the moderator of today's agenda. So please welcome Dr. Suryaningsih, SSM Hum.
Thank you for the opening, Mbak Rodia. Mbak Rodia, betul ya? Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, participants and the students, also the honorable speakers, and Pak Suryadi also as the head of Magister Ilmu Sastra. Today, this is very exciting moment because we are having two distinguished speakers. And I would like to welcome first to Pak Izul because, no, I would like to say the full name first. Mr. Iskandar Zulkarnain, PhD. And Ibu Etta Farmacelia Nurul Hadi, PhD. Then I will turn into Pak Izul. Okay, before we go on with our presentations, I would like to say that this is a very exciting and very hopefully, I'm sure it will be very inspiring discussions for us as learners, as students, and also as teachers in English literature and media studies in general. So I guess the first sessions is we are going to divide the presentations into two sessions. The first session will be for Ibu Etta Farmacelia, and usually the what is it called, the speaker who are the main speaker here, Pak Izul, is in the last one. So this is in music performance. Bu Etta is the opening band. Pak Izul is the main band. Okay. Ibu Etta, as you might read from your screen, I would like to say that she has already accomplished many journey in education levels. So far, I remember she took 2 times for master degree in English literature and have a PhD in English literature in Louisiana State University. I also remember that she left me in English department alone because she went to United States 2 times and got 2 times for Fulbright scholarships. And we are very proud of her about that. And we find that we also feel grateful that she got a lot of experience while learning English literature in United States, not only learning English literature, but also teaching in for American students, and also got the last one is, if I'm not mistaken, she got a Cecil Award, and it's such a prestigious one for us here. So without any further ado, I guess we will start the presentation for Ibu Etta Farmacelia. You have around, let's say, 30 to 40 minutes. And then after that, we proceed to the next speaker, Pak Izul, after you finish the presentations. The screen is yours, Ibu Etta.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Bu Yening, for the generous introduction. So, yeah, I met Pak Izul here when we both won Fulbright Master's grant for our master study back then in 2006. And yeah, so as Bu Yening said, it's like if it's a performance, musical performance. So I'm just introducing because our guest today is Pak Izul. So my presentation is, I will be very brief, even though Bu Yening gives me 30 to 45 minutes, probably just 10 to 15 minutes, because the main material, it will be exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation and doing everything that Pak Izul asks us to do later. But so I'm going to, let me share my screen. Okay, so basically this is just close reading revisited, because I'm not going to talk much about it because I think everybody is familiar with close reading. what is more interesting is later when we look at close reading, close watching, and close playing. But talking about close reading, so when we approach literary texts, we usually try to interpret the text. So I'm going to start by remind us of traditional approaches to literature. So up to the 19th century, before the 20th century, when experts or when critics approach literature, usually they do one of these two things. So these are the traditional approaches to literature, either historical biographical or moral philosophical. So basically, in historical biographical is looking at a literary work as a reflection of its author's life and times, and or the life and times of the characters in the work. So we will, let's say when we are talking about Shakespeare, so we're not talking about the play itself, but we are talking about, okay, what happens to, let's say if it's a historical play, so Henry VIII, for example, then we are looking more of the life of Henry VIII, or maybe about Shakespeare himself. So historical, biographical, or moral philosophical. Looking at literature, looking at literary texts as a medium to teach morality and also to probe philosophical issues. So these are traditional approaches to literature up to the 19th century, even though we are still also, some of us are still doing this as well with different names. But then in the 20th century, so we know in the 1920s, 1930s, as a response to traditional approaches, we know there are some critics that belong to what now we call it as Russian formalism and American criticism. So for formalist critic, so this is in 1920s, 1930s, that the interpretation of a work of art should come from the work structure. So from the work structure, not from the extrinsic elements such as the author's life or historical context. So they refuse looking at literature from the historical context or biographical context. And a work of art is an object in its own right that can be analyzed without referring to any extra textual evidence or sources such as history, politics, or sociology. So this is in Russia. And then in the 1930s and 1960s, we have new criticism that look at a work of art or text as a concrete object that can be analyzed to discover its meaning independent of its author's intention or the emotional state of values of either its author or reader. So we don't care about the author, we don't care about the reader, but we focus only on the text. When we're talking about a poem, when we're approaching a poem, so a poem's meaning, according to new critics, must reside within its own structure. And this is what we are going to talk more about today. It's a close reading, that a close reading, according to new critics, can determine a text's correct meaning. So close reading is actually what we borrow from new critics, from new criticism. And even though at the moment, even when we are approaching a literary text using any literary criticism, the first thing that we do is actually we close read the text. So close reading, this is from glossary from Charles Pressler's book. Close reading is a term used by the new critics for the kind of reading or analysis of a text that applies the principle of new criticism to a text to arrive at an interpretation. Implied in the term is a close and detailed analysis of the text itself, its verbal qualities, to arrive at an interpretation without referring to historical, authorial, or cultural concerns. A close reading of a text became the hallmark of the new critics' methodology, sometimes referred to as explication de texte in French literary studies. So this is quotation from Clint Brooks, so one of the prominent figure in new criticism. So this is taken from formalist criticism. Here are some articles of faith I could subscribe to. This is Clint Brooks speaking. That the primary concern of criticism is with the problem of unity, the kind of whole which the literary work forms or fails to form, and the relation of the various parts of each other in building up this whole. that in a successful work, format and content cannot be separated, that form is meaning, that literature is ultimately metaphorical and symbolic, that the general and the universal are not seized upon by abstraction, but got at through the concrete and the particular. That literature is not a surrogate for religion, that, as Alan Tate says, specific moral problems are the subject matter of literature, but that the purpose of literature is not to point to a moral, that the principle of criticism define the area relevant to literary criticism. They do not consider the method for carrying out the criticism. So basically focusing on the text itself. So in doing close reading, these are the things that we need to pay attention to, form and organic form, texture, image, symbol, fallacies, point of view, the speaker's voice, tension, irony, paradox. So when we are talking about new criticism, we remember that fallacies, intentional fallacies, affective fallacies. Basically, we don't pay attention to the intention of the author or the emotional state or the emotional failure of the author or even the reader. So this is a poem. So this is an example taken from a handbook of critical approaches to literature. And this book presents a poem intentionally presented without its title and poet. And this book gives an illustration of how to approach a poem without knowing the title, without knowing the poet. So we know that undeniable that sometimes knowing the title or knowing the poet or the author of a work help us to understand, help us to interpret. But that's not the focus of close reading. Some of you must be familiar with the poem, but let's pretend that we don't know the title of this poem, that we are going to look only at the poem itself as a text. So this is a poem, a slumber did my spirit seal, I had no human fears, seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of early years. No motion has she now, no force, she neither hears nor sees, rolled round in earth's general course with rocks and stones and trees. So, okay, organic form, we know that from the text, we can see that, of course, this is a poem. This is not a short story, this is not a play. It has 2 stanzas. And remember that we focus on the words, the language. So this is an English poem. So we know that we can see that the first stanza uses past tense, but then the second stanza uses present tense. So in the first stanza, we can see that the she is so active and alive that the speaker, remember when we are talking about a poem, we're talking about the speaker who speaks. So that's one of the questions that we ask when we start reading a poem. So the speaker here, because the she in this first stanza is so active and alive, the speaker can be the father, mother, lover, or whoever, could hardly comprehend any earthly touch to the living female figure. She's so alive. It's not possible that she can be dead. But then, second stanza, present tense, she is already dead. And there's no word death or dead here or die, but we see from here, one word here that means daily of each day that she rolled round in earth's general course with rocks, stones, and trees. So we focus on the organic form, the words, and here, if we look at the form, if we look at the poem, so there are lots of monosyllabic words. And the meter is also sort of unvarying, alternating between strong and between soft and strong syllables. And we can also see that it has regular and predictable rhyme. But somehow, we can also feel emotional impact from irony and paradox. if we look closely at these two stanzas, we can see that the speaker of this poem has both gotten and not gotten what he or she desired. That she's alive, so active, but then not gotten, the speaker not gotten what he or she desired, because suddenly in the second stanza, she died already. In the first stanza, we can see that the speaker was initially confident in the eternal life of the female figure. But in the second stanza, the speaker has to face reality. In close reading, we also look at symbols or imageries, figures of speech. So we have sleep imagery here, slumber, rest and quiet. Spirit, when we talk about spirit, it can be death. It suggests death as well as life. So that's the paradox. And when we're talking about the word seal, we're talking about security and finality. So when something is sealed, so it's secured. But also when sealed, it can also suggest finality. So in this poem, the word seal means the coffin and the grave. So the second stanza shows us that the female figure that used to be active human being now is just a thing. It's not different from rocks, stones, and trees. And we can see kinesthetic imagery here from motion in the first stanza to lack of motion in the second stanza. So basically, even without knowing the title, without knowing the author, without talking about the historical background, we can still enjoy this poem. So basically, this is the final text. This is the final slide. As I said, this is just an introduction. So in close reading, we need a sensitivity to the words of the text and all their denotative and connotative values and implication. We need to pay attention to structural relationship and pattern. And we need to also examine. So we need to do some examination of arrangement of words, images and symbols, details of plot and action. So basically, in close reading, we need to see how internal relationships gradually reveal a form, and the form actually creates meaning of a text. So that's all from me, because I'm excited to listen to the presentation from Pak Izul. Thank you. Thank you, Bu Yani.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Etta. I guess this is for those who has no idea what close reading is. We can get some highlight what the meaning of close reading. We have already listened to Ibu Etta's presentations concerning about the historical background of the emergence of his close reading, and also at the same time, she gives us light tips, light quote unquote, because close reading is light actually. That is, we should have sensitivity to find the meaning, because there is always internal relationship to build the meaning. Thank you, Ibu Etta. Let's move on and proceed to the next presenters, our main speakers. Please help me to, to the moderator to show us the curriculum vitae of our speaker. Yeah, okay. Bapak Iskandar Zulkarnain, PhD, is having educations. I'm really sorry. He graduated from Universitas Padjadjaran, Faculty of Cultural Sciences, Cultural Studies in 2001. So basically, Pak Iskandar can speak Bahasa Indonesia very well. And master degree in English literature in 2008 from Florida State University, and PhD in visual and cultural studies from University of Rochester College of Arts and Sciences in New York. So very complete ya Pak, English literature and visual and cultural studies. He is full-time lecturer in visual communication design, and also, let me see, from Hobart and, assistant professor of media and society, Hobart and William Smith Colleges from 2023 up to the present. So Pak Izul right now is staying and teaching in New York. Also, he is a full-time lecturer in visual communication design, President University. President University is in Indonesia, right, Pak Izul?
Cikarang.
Oh yeah, Cikarang. Yeah. And he also accomplished many academic achievements from many universities, like Rochester and Hobart and William Smith Colleges in USA. Okay, Pak Izul, we are looking forward for hearing your explanations or your sharing of knowledge concerning about visual and cultural studies. Certain topic, the topic is close watching, close playing, close reading. The screen is yours, Pak Iskandar.
Thank you, Bu Shrianingsih. Okay, so let me just see this. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and I would like to thank you to the Faculty of Humanities, Faculty of Literature, or Faculty of Humanities. I think Faculty of Humanities at University Diponegoro, and also the Magister in Literature, especially Dr. Etta Formacelia Haryadi. We go way back, as Dr. Etta mentioned. So today I'm trying to connect between three different medium, which is literature, film, and video games. And I also would like to thank again to Dr. Etta, who just gave a really brief but concise reintroductions to close reading. So that's something that I don't have to. I probably will repeat that again a little bit, but I'm not going to go all the way to discuss about close reading again. So I guess today I would like to start with the notion of text. So I would like to start with discussing about literature and media as text. So it's easy to think about literature as text because when we usually say text, it means like written text. But here, what I want us to think about text is much broader than just a written text. So I want us to think about text, and this is basically kind of like the framework of cultural studies, or visual and cultural studies. And I said that. So thinking about text as cultural artifacts that can be interpreted because they have meaning. So any cultural artifacts that you can interpret and that can generate meaning, that we can call them as text. So that's the kind of like the first thing that I want to start us to think about text here. So in this case, then we can think of media as text, and different media, including literature, as text. They have different forms, different structures, different properties, different and affordances. So literature, written text, you basically read the text. Film is audiovisual, then you have to watch it. And video games is interactive media. So you have to not just watch, not just read, but you have to play it. So that's sort of kind of like the idea here that I would like to introduce. So now, because different media have different forms and have different structures and properties and affordances, then in order to comprehensively study a form of media as a text, we need to understand its specificities. So it's easy to say that we can always study text, for instance, by using literary theory or using literary analysis. We can study film using literary analysis. We can study video games using literary analysis, and perhaps vice versa. But here I would like to say that yes, there may be overlaps between these different mediums in terms of like representation and presentation, but they have specific structures, they have specific properties, they have specific forms. So we have to attend to that specificities here in order to comprehensively study them. So that's sort of like what I would like to introduce here. So one approach, and I would say that this is probably one basic approach to do this medium-specific analysis, is through cross-reading in literature, close watching in film. I mean, they don't actually say close watching. Frequently, they just say close reading film, but I would like to be specific here because you don't read films, but you watch films. So that's close watching is sort of kind of like the term that I made up here. And then close playing for video games. So, but the idea here is basically the same, that you have to pay attention to each of medium-specific properties, medium-specific structures, medium-specific forms and affordances. So that's sort of kind of like what I would like to start us thinking about this. Okay, so oh, by the way, if I talk too fast, please remind me. Sometimes I tend to talk too fast when I'm trying to
Sure.
explain things. Okay, so okay, so let's start with close reading. I mean, Dr. Etta already explained it, so I'm just going to repeat this a little bit. So close reading in literature, and I would like to go back to Cleant Brooks again. So this is like a quote from Cleant Brooks, which is the main figure in New Criticisms in the United States. So according to him, close reading is an essential strategy to find the structure of meanings, evaluations, and interpretations. So you do close reading to find the structures of literature, meaning in literature, and to evaluate it and to interpret it. So that's sort of kind of like the idea of close reading. Although I would like to say that the New Criticism actually really specific in thinking about close reading, because they only think about poetry. So Cleant Brooks only think close reading can be fully applied only in studying poetry. They don't even think about like other forms of literature, like novels or prose. But I think as a approach, it's a really basic approach in thinking about literature. So it's here I'm thinking about close reading, not just as looking at poetry as like Dr. Etta already gave us an example, but also thinking about literature in general. Okay. So, and Dr. Etta already mentions about, I mean, in her reference of Cleanbrook, that focusing on the form or the how and the content, the what of a text. So form is how, content is what the story is about, and form is how the story is presented, how the story plot is structured, how the literary devices are used to tell the story. So like using metaphor, allegory, motif, tone, etc. So that's sort of kind of like the idea of close reading, like looking at the form and the content and analyzing them and looking at revealing patterns, revealing structures. And I just use a really, I guess, famous example here. And I'm not going to make it a mystery. So I'm just going to use Scarlet Letter here, excuse me, as an example in close reading. And I just pick 3 different passages from Scarlet Letter. So this is like from different chapters. So the first one is, Mother, said Pearl, the sunshine does not love you. It runs away and hides itself because it is afraid of something on your bosom. It will not flee from me, for I wear nothing on my bosom yet. So that's a Pearl saying to her mother. And then the Scarlet Letter was her passport into regions where other women dare not tread. And that last passage, basically, but the Scarlet Letter ceased to be a stigma, which attracted the world's scorn and bitterness, and became a type of something to be sorted over and looked upon with awe, and yet with reference to. So that's from the final chapter. So here, the concept of close reading, I guess, can be applied in thinking about, like pretty simple here, like thinking about how the progressions of the Scarlet Letter as a symbol. So from the first one, like Pearl saying that the sunshine does not love you, it runs away and hides itself because it's afraid of something on your bosom, which is the Scarlet Letter that Hester Prynne has to wear on her bosom. So it's mark. So the Scarlet Letter becomes a mark of like sin, right? And then the second Scarlet Letter was her passport into regions where other women dare not tread. So it means that by wearing the Scarlet Letter, Hester Prynne sort of becoming out of the society, or out of womanhood, out of a normal womanhood. So like other women dare not tread. But at the end, in the final chapter, it's shifting. The Scarlet Letter as a symbol here is shifting into a type of something to be sorted over and looked upon with awe. So it turns into a mark of reverence, a mark of awe, when in the beginning it was a mark of sin. So in this case, we can sort of like discuss about like how the Scarlet Letter, when we close read this novel by Nathaniel Hawthorne, we can look at like the symbolisms and the use of metaphor of the Scarlet Letter, and how it shifted from the beginning to the end, and how it sort of kind of like function in the story itself. So that's sort of kind of like the idea of close reading in the literature. So it's just like a rough, really rough sort of kind of like rehearsal, I guess. So that's sort of something that I would like to start with. And now, looking at the next approach, which is close watching in film studies. So in film studies, the concept of close watching is sort of kind of like, and just sort of like an approach to study film like a language. So again, we're thinking about film as a text through a taxonomy of its form and an examination of its rules. So, excuse me. So when we study film through close watching, we actually don't think of it as just a story. don't think of it as like a literature, don't think of it as a story. But we have to think about the form and the rules, the audiovisual structures and the rules. So some scholars call this approach a formal film analysis. So that's how we usually call it in film studies, like how to study formal film, how to do formal film analysis. Okay. So, and here I'm actually borrowing a theory of formal film analysis from film scholar Ami Villarejo. So Ami Villarejo in film studies, the basics, essentially, she introduces these elements of formal film analysis. So according to her, when we study film formally, then we have to think about this 4 elements, which is mise-en-scène, cinematography, editing, and sound. So as you can see, we're not actually looking at the story, but we're looking at the audiovisual properties here. So, with me, and I'm going to sort of gonna give a brief introduction of each element here. So first one is the mise-en-scène. So mise-en-scène is a French term. Literally, it means what is put into a given shot in film, in order to establish the film's world through its visual style. So essentially, mise-en-scène is whatever is in front of the camera, whatever the director or whatever the filmmaker put into a given shot in order to establish a film's world through its visual style. So, and mise-en-scène, according to Villarejo, has 4 sub-elements or 4 components. Sorry, I think it's 5, not 4. So first one is setting, which includes sets and props. And then the second one is lighting. And then the third one is costume. And the fourth one is makeup and hair. And the last one is figure behavior. So these are the components of mise-en-scène. These are the components of what is put into a given shot in order to establish a film's world. So, and I'm not going to go over each of these elements because I don't think we have time for that. But I'm going to just focus on the second components here, which is lighting. Okay, and to give you an idea of like how we can do a close watching of close watching in film analysis. Okay, so lighting in film and also in photography, actually, because this is something to do with visual structures. So there are 2 types of lighting: high key lighting and low key lighting. Now, can anyone guess from these 2 images here? The top one is from Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, Batman, and then the bottom one is from William Dozier's Batman TV series, which is from the 1960s, I believe. So, can you guess which one used high key lighting, which one used low key lighting? Can type on the chat. Okay. So high key lighting is, okay, good. Very good. So yes, so the top one is low key lighting. The bottom one is high key lighting. So high key lighting, yes, good. So high key lighting is essentially a little contrast between light and dark, soft, and revealing of details. So high key lighting, you don't usually see shadow. And low key lighting, basically, there's a high contrast between light and dark, harsh and hard. Now, what can you tell about these two images in terms of genre by using the type of lighting here? Like, what type of genre in film usually use high key lighting, and what type of genre in film that usually uses low key lighting? Okay, high key lighting, action movies, low key drama. Well, but Batman is an action movies, right? So, but it uses, I mean, The Dark Knight is action movies, but it uses low key lighting. Yes. So low key lighting usually is used for like horror, thriller, and in the case of The Dark Knight, essentially Christopher Nolan wants to highlight the gothic aspect of Batman, right? While high key lighting is usually humor, like comedy, romantic. So in this case, you can sort of kind of like think about like when you close watch a film, then you can pay attention of like what type of lighting is used that the filmmaker is using, and then and you connect it to the genre. So that's usually like how lighting is used. But there's some filmmaker that actually challenges this genre conventions or these lighting conventions. So for instance, anyone knows about this Ari Aster Midsommar? No? That's okay. So yeah, so Ari Aster Midsommar, what type of lighting did you think the film uses? Yes, thank you, Asterida. So it uses high key lighting, but it's actually a horror film. So that's sort of kind of like the idea of like you can sort of like analyze films just by thinking about how the lighting is used. So in this case, in Ari Aster Midsommar, you actually see an atypical uses of lighting in horror films. Even though horror film typically uses low key lighting, but Midsommar actually challenges that convention by using high key lighting, and it's the effect is interesting because the atmosphere is like bright and tend to be happy, like pastel tone of color. Yeah, it's like colorful, happy, but the story is not happy. So that's sort of kind of like how we can sort of thinking about the form, the mise en scène in this case is used, the lighting is used to sort of kind of like emphasize a certain kind of visual argument, a certain kind of a visual rhetoric, you can say that. So that's an example from mise en scène in terms of like lighting. Okay, so now I'm going to move to the second one then. So cinematography. So again, cinematography, probably this is the most sort of familiar for everyone. So cinematography, essentially anything that has something to do with the camera. So if mise en scène is anything that's put in front of the camera, then cinematography is everything that's the camera is used. So in this case, Villarejo mentions that there are 5 components of cinematography. So the first one is framing, second one is angle, and then the third one is focus, and the fourth one is camera movement, and the last one is camera compositing. So these are part of cinematography. Now, again, I'm not going to give example of like all this. So I'm just going to focus on the first one, which is framing. So framing is essentially thinking about the camera as a frame, as a visual frame. So in film, if the frame provides more information, then we call saturated. And if the information is less, then we call rarefied. So that's sort of kind of like the lingo in film studies. And then we also have to think about frames in its function as a border, like geometrically or dynamically. So in film and photography, you're familiar with it. There's this rule that's called rule of thirds. So it's essentially you see on the image at the top. So basically the frame is divided into 3 parts, both horizontal and vertical. And what is in film and in photography, what is considered a good framing compositions if you put the main object within the axis of this 3 divisions. So that's why it's called the rule of thirds. So, and then we also have to think about the way elements within the frame interact, and then the angle of the frame, from whose point of view, from whose position. And then what is also important is when you think about frame in film, it's not just what you see in front of you, but you also have to think about what the frame excludes. So in films, you have the 6 spatial axes of out of field. So above or below the frame, right or left of the frame, away from the camera, or toward and beyond the camera. So we also have to think about like what is left outside of the frame. So that's sort of like the idea of frame. And for instance, here this is the image of the bottom is from Full Metal Jacket by Stanley Kubrick. You can see like how the frame structure is really sort of kind of like symmetrical. Like you have the sort of like main, well, not the main character, but the character that's focused is in the middle, and everyone around him is sort of kind of like in this rectangular structures of the frame. So that's how you think about frame. Now, I want to give you an example of framing, a really particular framing in film. So this is from Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love, one of the best film in my opinion. So what can you tell about framing here? What can you tell about the framing of this particular shot? Any thoughts? Any idea? Anything? Or what do you see? Okay. Okay, it's not exactly symmetrical. Okay, in what way? Are the 2 characters in the same room? Okay, that's an interesting question. Okay, in terms of the proportions. Okay. Can you say more, Asterida? What do you mean by proportion? Okay, two characters in the same room. The frame is in the female. Okay. So what you see here is actually two characters, right, on the frame. Now, do you think they sit such as they sit next to each other? Okay. No? Okay. So they don't sit next to each other. Okay. So how come we can see it looks like that they sit next to each other? Unbalanced relationship. Okay. That's go straight to the analysis. Interesting. Yes, with the mirror. Yes, so here it's interesting because Wong Kar-wai uses mirror like really creatively and aesthetically to make it look like they're sitting next to each other. But actually, the male character, Tony Leung, is actually out of the frame. What we see is actually a reflection of him in the mirror, right? So, and you can see that he is looking at Maggie Cheung character here, but he's not actually sitting next to her, sorry. So where do you think Tony Leung sits? So from us, I guess from our point of view, Tony Leung is actually sitting like behind us, sort of behind us to the right, so we can see the reflection there, right? So here, it's interesting because they're together in the same room, but in this frame, in this shot, they're not really together because they're separated by this mirror. And you can tell that they probably like each other. So it's sort of kind of like symbolizing the framing itself, telling us like how, what do you think? What's your interpretation here? I mean, I think Julia mentioned like unbalanced relationship. And I'm just going to spoil the story here. So basically the story is that each of the spouses is actually having an affair with each other. So Maggie Cheung's husband is having an affair with Tony Leung's wife. And they're basically trying to figure out why. And yes, there might be a big gap for their love. In a way, yes. So in a way that they're together, but they're not. Or they long to be together, but they cannot be together. Because if they go together, then they will basically following what their spouses are doing, which they don't want to do. So in this case, the uses of framing itself sort of kind of like telling us or like showing us like the kind of relationship that they have here. So it's not necessarily like telling us through narration or telling us through story, but telling us through visual framing here. So that's an example of how we can close watch a scene and thinking about it or analyzing it through the concept of framing. Okay. So that's the second one. And then the third one is editing. Now, editing is basically, I believe editing is the most fundamental aspect in filmmaking. So essentially, it's the one that's sort of like joining the shots together to create logic, to create the plot, to create the narrative sequences, or to create the story. So that's why editing, I think, is the most fundamental one here. And without editing, probably a film may not be comprehensible for us because they just join like chaotically. Okay, so according to Villarejo, components of editing, and I think some of these are actually really old, so not many filmmakers use it anymore. But in terms of editings, you have cut, you have dissolve, you have fade, wipe, or iris. And I'm just going to give you an example here. So the one on from Wong Kar-wai movie is using cut, and then the one on the right, top right, is using dissolve editing. The one on the bottom right is the fade to white. The one on the square on the left is using wipes, and then the one on the further left is using iris editing. So, and you can see that wipe and iris and dissolve is still frequently used, but wipe and iris editing are not popular anymore. And usually you can tell that if a film uses wipe or iris editing, is usually old films usually still uses that. The most basic one is cut. You just cut a shot from one scene to another scene. So like you see from the top in the middle. So, but what I want to go further in terms of editing is that in narrative film, or in narrative film generally, you have what is called, and this is basically a Hollywood sort of pattern. You have this structure of continuity editing. So it's basically a system of editing conventions that organize the spatial and temporal editing sequence. And in the concept of continuity editing, usually you have the establishment, and then you have the breakdown, and you have the re-establishment. So to give you a basic example, if a story is set in Semarang, so to establish that the film is set in Semarang, then what do you think the first shot will be? What will be an example of a landmark in Semarang that when people see it, oh, it is Semarang? Tugu Muda. Okay, so that would be the establishing shot in the beginning. And then the next scene will break down, will go to detail. It can be in a shop, or in a mall, or in a school, or in a university. So that's more like a breakdown. And then in the next shot, in the next scene, there's a reestablishment again. So essentially, this is sort of kind of like so that there is a continuity in our logic of the shots, that we know, oh, this is Semarang, and then this is a story, and the story will go like this, and then will reestablish itself. So that's a basic sort of kind of like a pattern in continuity editing. And we can look, and we can analyze films by looking at like the editing technique in this case. So now I'm going to give you another example from In the Mood for Love that I think is really particular. So this is in terms of editing. I hope that the video will play. The sound will play well.
陳太，我聽到隔離有聲，我仲要顧生顧太翻咗嚟添。
仲未翻喎？你揾佢哋有事啊？
冇，我諗住揾佢哋傾下偈啫。你一個人啊？
係啊。
又會咁早翻嚟嘅？
我見唔係幾舒服，咪早啲翻嚟咯。
你邊度唔舒服啊？我有藥㗎喎。
唔使啦，我瞓下得㗎啦。
好啊，我唔阻你啦。
Okay, so what can you tell about this scene in terms of editing? Any thoughts, any idea, anything? Is it like a common shot in terms of editing? Yes, thank you, I studied that. It only focuses on the woman, even though she is having conversation with the other character, right? So in a conventional continuity editing, when a character talks with another character, you usually have this shot, the first shot sort of kind of structure, right? So you start with maybe shot of two people, and then go to one character when they talk, and then you move the camera to the other character when the other character talks, right? But we don't see that here. Why? Why do you think that this editing technique is used here? Any guess? I know because you haven't seen the movie, it's probably hard to guess. Very good, Eri. Yes, it's taken from the woman point of view, right? So in the film, essentially, you only see Maggie Cheung character and Tony Leung character. You only see these two characters most of the time. You never see the husband or the wife who are cheating. So in this case, the visual editing structure is telling us that the whole film is from the perspective of these two characters only. So it's not, it's really subtle here. Like you actually probably don't notice it unless you watch it closely, like through the movie. But throughout the film, like you never see the other, the other spouse, and that's like intentional by Wong Kar-wai, because you can interpret that, oh, this film is basically portraying the story through this woman and the other guy point of view. It's not their spouses. So that's how you can analyze film through the editing technique here. Okay, so I hope okay in terms of like pacing, not fast, not too fast. So I'm going to move to the last element, which is sound. Sound primarily deals with sync or synchronized sound in film. So basically sound that's synchronized to the film image. So according to Villarejo, there are three components of sound. So first one is speech, which means dialogue or voiceover. And then the second one is music, live or soundtrack. And then the third one is noise, which is any sound outside of speech and music. So like banging of the door, like footsteps, those are noises. So that, and in film, in terms of sound, we have this sort of kind of like two types of sound in film. So the first one is diegetic sound. So diegetic sound is basically sound within the imaginative world of the film. So it means that both the characters in the film and the audience can hear it. And then the second one is non-diegetic sound, which is sound that is there for the ears of the audience alone. So like voiceover narrations, that's that non-diegetic sound, because only the audience can hear the narration. The characters cannot hear the narrator. Although some films try to challenge that. So, but typically these are two types of sound in film, like diegetic and non-diegetic. But some filmmakers right now try to blend it like seamlessly. Like for instance, in this film Baby Driver, the use of sounds in this film is actually really particular because the sound sort of like moves seamlessly from diegetic to non-diegetic throughout the film. So now I want to give you another example from In the Mood for Love. You can tell by this time how I really like this film. So this is the concept of sound as motif in the film. So okay, so what can you tell about the sound, the use of sound here? That's very obvious. Okay, sound is mysterious. Ambience, okay. What else? Okay, gloomy. Okay, but how is it used here in the film? Yeah, the same sound for different scenes. So that's sort of like the concept of motif, like motif, and motif I think is in literature, in close reading as well. Like motif is like repetitive aspect or repetitive elements that like shows up frequently or shows up like repetitively. So we have like this particular music soundtrack that keeps recurring like in this film. So and the sound, I mean, the whole song is actually quite, I can say, not happy. It's like, yes, heart-throbbing effect is probably probably quite accurate there. So the sound here is sort of kind of like saying something about the relationship of the character here. I mean, if you notice that from the first scene to the last one, there's also progression. Like the first one is when they first like encounter each other as neighbors, and then the last one you can say that like they have a much closer relationship, like they get to know each other. But at the same time, because of the tone, because of the type of music that is played, we can tell that it's not going to be a happy ending. Like the relationship is not going to be a happy ending. So that's sort of kind of like the use of sound as motif here. So again, here, what I'm trying to say here is that by close watching, we look at like the particular properties, the particular like elements as the specificities of, in this case, film. Like we look at the mise-en-scène, we look at the cinematography, editing, and sound elements in films. We don't actually talk about the story, the plot, but all these elements actually tell us something about a film. And I want to emphasize that all film, I guess I would say all films, what we see in all films is there for a purpose. So even like footsteps, even the most menial, the most like trivial things is there for a purpose. So in this case, then we have to watch closely in order to sort of kind of analyze film. We don't just focus on just focusing on the story, but we focus on how the story is also represented audio visually to the properties of film as a kind of like specific medium. So that's sort of like how I would like to introduce close watching as an approach in analyzing film. And the next one is, well, I'm gonna go for quite. So this one is close playing in video game studies. Okay, so close playing, again, similar to close reading and close watching, is looking at the formal qualities of video games as a meaningful cultural artifact. So we think about video game as a text that have meaning. So some scholars call this approach an essential element for textual analysis of games or critical video game studies. And I'm going to introduce these quotations from Edmund Chang from her article, from his article, sorry, Gaming as Writing or World of Warcraft as World of Warcraft. So according to him, close playing, like close reading, requires careful and critical attention to how the game is played or not played, to what kind of game it is, to what the game looks like or sounds like, to what the game world is like, to what choices are offered or not offered to the player, to what the goals of the game are, to how the game interacts with and address the player, and to how the game fits into the real world, and so on. So that's sort of kind of like, I think, a useful way in thinking about close playing as an approach in analyzing video games. So you look at the like how you look at the play structure and also the kind of sound narrative and also the specific elements in video games as well. So and I'm going to go back to the idea of games as text. So games as text, which means cultural artifacts that have meaning. So we can think about meaning within the game, which some people call meaningful play, and meaning around the game, which means like the cultural significance of a particular games. So for instance, when we play the games, then we make meaning within the games. But then when we talk about the games with other people, we talk about the game status, the game meaning, the game culture significance as sort of kind of like in a society. So that's sort of like the idea of like the different layer of meaning within the games, the different layers of meaning in video games. Okay. And then when we think about games as text, we can also think about the paratext. So paratext, if you're not familiar with the concepts, so if text is like the main objects, the paratext is every elements that support the text, but it's not part of the main text. So like you're thinking about video games in this case. So the paratext of video games, we can think of like the video games CD cover, the video game trailer, the video games live streaming, video game let's play. So these are the paratexts of that sort of kind of like not the main text, but it supports or it adds to our understanding of video games as text. And I would also like to introduce the concept of designers' ideas and values and players' participation and interactions. So I want to touch this in terms of like the concept of intentional fallacy and affective fallacy that Dr. Etta mentions. Yes, narratology and ludology, but that's well, it's kind of it's a debate in early video game studies, but now many people in video game studies think that it's actually rather unproductive debate because narratology and ludology is actually stem on the same kind of like ideas of close playing in this case. So right now, video game scholars try to think about studying video games through a much more hybrid or much more sort of kind of like combinations or a more expanded approach than just trying to create a binary between narratology and ludology, because narrative and ludic, they're actually based on the same kind of like idea of games as text. So in this case, a lot of video game scholars right now actually try to not thinking of video game within this framework of ludology and narratology. And I would actually suggest, if you're interested in this debate between narratology and ludology, probably Ian Bogost is the best person that you should look into in sort of kind of like explaining how this debate is actually unproductive in a way. But I would like to return to the concept of like intentional fallacy and affective fallacy in close reading in so new criticism, because in new criticism you're basically getting rid of the author and getting rid of the reader. But in video games, you actually cannot do that, because video games is the rules within video games are designed by the designers, and the designers have ideas and values. And then another important thing in this case is that video game actually cannot function, or video game don't exist without the player. Like unlike other medium like literature or film, which don't actually really incorporate the notion of the reader or the notion of the audience, the watcher. Video games actually, as a medium, it has to incorporate the player in the games, because video games cannot move. So in video games, the player is a necessary part of the text. So a game is not really complete text without a player that interprets its rules and interacts with it. So a player in video game is not just an audience. It's not just a reader, but it's actually an interactor. It's actually part of the game itself. So a player is part of the content and also part of the context of a game. So that's why video game here is really specific. When we think about video game, we cannot separate the player, and we cannot also separate the designer different from like new criticism, because as a medium, it really requires player. Player is part of the content because you play as a character, or you play as a block in Tetris. You play as an Italian in Super Mario Bros., an Italian plumber. So you are actually part of the content here. So okay. So in terms of like close playing, I would like to introduce this sort of framework, like a really basic framework by Clara Fernandez-Farah in her introduction to game analysis. So essentially, Fernandez-Farah wants us to think about video games as composed as like several building blocks in terms of close playing. So in this case, the big 10 or the big umbrella, there are three sort of like components. So you have the context, you have the game overview, and you have the formal aspects. So context is actually the circumstances in which the game is produced and played. So context inside the game genre, the audience, so it's part of the context. And then the game overview is the content, the basic features that distinguish the game from other games. So like number of players, rules and goals of the game, so game modes, game mechanics, spaces of the game, the fictional world of the game, and the story of the game. So I'm actually just pick and choose these building blocks element. This is not comprehensive because there are many elements that Fernandez-Farah introduces in her book, but I'm just showing you sort of kind of like several components of that I think pertinent in terms of like thinking about close playing. So in terms of the formal aspects or how a game aspect is constructed or the pieces that make it up, so you can think of like rules of the world, and then there's also diegetic versus extra diegetic rules. So rules that within the game and rules that sort of like outside the games, and then relationship between the rules and the fictional world, values and procedural rhetoric, control schemes, representations like visual design, sound design, and music. So this is sort of kind of like overlap with film studies in a way, and then representations and identity. So in this case, I'm just going to focus on just one particular element, which is in the formal aspects, which is the values and procedural rhetoric. So this is based on Ian Bogo's book, Persuasive Games, about the expressive power of video games. So essentially, procedural rhetoric is an analytic and design technique used to make an ideological statement persuasively through a video game's rule-based system. So basically what procedural rhetoric is that you're trying to make an argument or you're trying to express a certain ideology, you're trying to making a certain statement, but not through the story, not through the content, but through the structure of the video games, through the rule-based system of the video games. So that's basically the concept of procedural rhetoric. And this is actually what, according to Bogus, what makes video game a video game. Because different from film and literature, video game can make an argument through its rule-based system. Now, to give you an example of this, just going to, and this is not me playing the game, this is more a recording of me playing the games. So this is a game called September 12th by Gonzalo Frasca. And this game is really interesting in terms of procedural rhetoric. So I'm just going to play it. Okay, so what do you notice about this game? Anything that you can tell about this game just from looking at the kind of like a snippet of its gameplay? Any thoughts? I can play it again. So let me just play it again. This is a web-based game. It's actually quite old, so that you cannot really play it using like modern browser now. Okay. The sound of someone crying. Okay, Middle East war reflections. In what way, Inda? Okay, there are lots of NPCs, yes. Okay. So, yes, in a way, I mean, you can tell from the title, September 12th, it's actually a reference to September 11. Yeah, so this is a game made as a kind of like response to war and terror policy in the United States right after September 11 with the Bush era. But it actually came out not September 11. It actually came out not 2001, but it actually came out a bit later, like 2006, if I'm not mistaken, or 2007. But so the game is actually interesting because you don't actually, I mean, I'm not doing justice here, but by showing it to you as a kind of like replay of the game. But if you play it, then you notice that first the control mechanism of this game is really odd, because first you can see that the crosshair, the target, is like really big for a kind of like shooting game. So you cannot really have a precise target, right? So it's like you target a certain area. And then if you play this game, there's a delay between when you click hit, when you target it and click hit, to when the missile is launched. So that's like an intentional delay from the developer, in this case from Praska. Like there's a kind of like millisecond delay. And so what happens is that, what do you think happens with this kind of like control mechanism? Like you have a larger target aim, and then there is a delay between when you click hit to when the missile is launched. What do you think happened when you play the game? Portrays the chaotic situation? Yes. It hits wrong target. Yes. Like the likelihood of you hitting the civilians is really high. So it means that you cannot really target the terrorists well. And if you notice that when you hit the civilians, when you bomb the civilians, then you hear the cry, And then you start to notice that the civilian will turn into a terrorist character. So that's sort of kind of like the rule-based mechanism that Frasca intentionally designed in this game. What do you think is the argument here? What do you think the argument of the game here? From its like kind of like game design perspective, like by having like larger target aim, and then there's a delay when you hit the target, so you always miss the target most likely, and then when you hit civilians, then the civilians turn it into a terrorist. What is the game trying to say, you think? Any thoughts? In a way, a protest or a critique, to be exact, probably a critique of a war and terror. Like essentially, it's saying that when you aim your policy to the wrong target, then what happens is actually you make it worse, right? So in this case, it's sort of like critiquing the war and on terror that basically just frame all Middle Eastern countries or Muslim countries as a kind of a country of terrorists. And here it's literally says that, I mean, if you bomb civilians, then you basically sort of kind of like creating more terrorists because they become a terrorist here. So, but here, Frasca is not actually saying that. It's not actually showing us through narrative. It's not actually showing us through story as well, but it's showing us to a rule-based system through the design of the game. So that's sort of something that, like an example of a procedural rhetoric here, essentially. And I think I basically go over in this presentation. So I'm just going to skip all this, and I would like to end this sort of like webinar presentations to sort of thinking about the limitations of close reading, close watching, and close playing. So this is sort of kind of like to give you an idea that close reading, close watching, and close playing is not the only approach in film, in literature and media studies, because formal analysis, like close reading, close watching, close playing, may bracket the historical, cultural, and socio-political dimensions of literature, film, and video games. It may also neglect to attend to fandom, technological shifts, industrial organizations, etc. So it's not the perfect way. So it's not the perfect approach in studying literature and media. So there are some other approaches that, especially in terms of in my own field, digital humanities, that try to expand the notion of like close reading, close watching, and close playing. But I would like to emphasize that even though it's not the most perfect approach, close reading, close watching, and close playing is still a very useful to practice as a medium-specific approach to study literature, film, and video games, especially to describe what we read, what we see, and what we play, and then thinking deeply about it. So thank you, and that's all for me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Izul. with such complete and I guess very fundamental and essential aspects in understanding film, literature, and media studies in general. And I guess this is at the same time differentiate between how our understanding about visual cultural product will be very much different with written literature. Literature, as we might know, spoke the intention and meanings through the words, while film and video games, visual is something very important. And I really enjoyed some of the clips from the movie In Wood for Love, and then the game, the Just Now game that you played in on the screen. And I just remember that, oh, therefore we have Ricciotto Canudo, who says in 1911 that film is what is called as the seven art, basically. He said so. So it combines all of the aesthetic of architecture, sculpture, painting, music, poetry, dance into the work of arts of films. So okay, all the participants here, so far I noticed from the chat there are two questions directed to both of the speaker. Please allow me to, to scroll, and at the same time allow me to shut my screen, because I have to read, and seemingly I couldn't read with these positions. And I invite other participants who would like to give a question, either in Bahasa Indonesia or in English. Let me see. Yes, the first questions on the chat is from this one, Lucia KDP. Miss Lucia KDP. Is there any recent trending phenomenon in society or literature triggering your topic of close reading, watching, or playing? Recall that new criticism or formalism 2 years ago. Sorry, I've left behind in the theory of literature. That's okay. And then the second questions, I guess, from Kahar DP, addressed to both speakers. The close reading approach investigates the form, analyze the content, in which themes, structures, and literary devices are its major concerns. They may help readers to establish a single claimed to be the best, the most unified, homogeneous interpretations of a text. However, the approach disregards authors' backgrounds, context, and textuality, as well as the text's historical and cultural significance. Hence, the interpretation is sometimes inadequate, while discursive practices, as suggested by Foucault and Pius Massius, the unspoken in the text would provide heterogeneous interpretation, significance, definition, translations. The practice and the spoken, at least, will be beneficial to the first phase of poetry translation, namely interpreting text. Moreover, they will contribute also to word divining practice. And what is the question? Okay, the question is, how do you respond to the critics addressed to the new criticism theory? So there are two questions in the chat box. Dr. Izu.
I think they're kind of the same.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I answer it first?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And I think, this is something that actually I mentioned it at the end, that I didn't really say it in the beginning, because I would like to sort of focus on the idea of like medium specific approach, that I think is I think the reason why is there a trending phenomenon in society, thinking about like close reading and new criticism, because new criticism is sort of kind of like old. I understand that. And I think the concept of close reading that started with new criticism is not actually abandoned in even like until now. I think the concept of close reading itself, I think, is fundamental in thinking about medium analysis of a medium, because you're looking at a specific like structures, specific elements specific to the medium itself. So I think when you're talking about trending phenomenon, what I guess I could also think of this in terms of like Marshall McLuhan idea that the medium is the message. So it's in a communication theory, it's in kind of like media studies. Marshall McLuhan is really famous saying that the medium is the message. It means that if you're looking only at the content, then you actually don't see the whole picture, because the form, the medium, actually also can say many things about the content. Like for instance, TikTok. If you're looking at TikTok, if you're looking at the content, then I mean the contents, there are a variety of contents. But what makes it particular is that TikTok is a short form video platform. So that short form video platform, that's the particularities of the medium. So that's something that we have to consider when we discuss about TikTok. We cannot discuss about TikTok just thinking about like the content of like for instance, like how would you communicate a certain idea, or how would you communicate a certain how would you sell a certain product on TikTok when you know that you have to create a content less than a minute. So that actually shapes the way you formulate the content, the way you like represent the content. So that's sort of kind of like why I think that close reading or close playing or close watching is still important in thinking about medium specific analysis, particularly looking at, like, for instance, the X or Twitter, formerly known as Twitter. Like Twitter, the content, if you're looking at the content, then the content is a variety of content. But what makes it unique is that with Twitter, you have a short form of text. So like Twitter is a textual medium. TikTok is an audiovisual medium. Like TikTok is probably the kind of like the latest like filmic platform that's popular among young generation. Instagram is a visual medium, mostly pictures. So that's why the content in Instagram is mostly visual based. The content in TikTok is audiovisual based. The content in X is text based, even though they incorporate like text now, but you have to think about the specificities of the medium. So that's why the notion of close reading or close playing and close watching, I think, is still important in thinking about the medium specific properties. And the second question, I understand that there is the critiques of new criticism, and I actually agree that the main weakness with new criticism is that it only thinks that there is one unified meaning of a poetry or of medium of literature, and post-structuralist theories like Foucault or Derrida or Jonathan Culler, essentially thinking that no, meaning is not unified. Meaning is actually I mean, you have to think of it in terms like the notion of deconstruction or bricolage or intertextuality, like you mentioned. Yes, but intertextuality doesn't mean you abandon close reading. Actually, intertextuality, you still close read a text, but you connect it to other texts. You connect it to the instability of the text itself. but you still close read a text. So I think I guess I'm not trying to defend new criticism. I know new criticism is sort of kind of like has a really a particular, as I mentioned, they only look at poetry actually. They don't look at any other forms of literature, in fact. But I think as a approach of like looking at a medium, looking at the structure of medium, I think close reading is still very useful in thinking about in analyzing a text, because how else you analyze a text without closely reading it, without closely watching it, without closely playing it? So I think that's why I introduced this, but I don't actually introduce new criticisms as like the antidote of our like modern like form of analysis. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Izil. I guess I share the same opinion with you too, that what is it? Our perspective is not what is it about, right? But what is it really about? And to know what is really about, and then we need to have the strategy of close reading, close watching, and close playing. Okay, Ibu Dr. Etta, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so basically, I'm just adding to what Dr. Izil just said, that so how this topic started. So it's actually, I told Dr. Izil that many of English department students, they tend not to read novels, not to analyze novels because they're long. So they tend to want to analyze movies instead, or even some of students started to work on video games. And I see that they did not really, most students not really have enough knowledge that they need to really analyze the text. So Dr. Izil mentioned earlier that text is, when we are talking about text, is not only written text, but it's cultural artifacts that can be interpreted because they have meaning. So basically anything can be text. So starting from that point on the one hand, so talking about the medium, text as medium of the text itself. And also, since there are so many literary criticism nowadays, so again, new criticism, formalism are old. They came in the early 20th century. Now we already in the 21st century. But somehow, let's say when applying feminist literary criticism or a Marxist literary criticism or a psychoanalytic literary criticism, most of the time students forget that what they analyze are actually literary texts, that they are not, when they are applying psychological approach, for example, they forget that the characters are not real human beings. Or when they are borrowing theories, social theories, they forget that the society in the novel are not real society. So that's why we felt the need of, again, reminding students that, hey, you need to remember that these are literary texts, that these are not real human beings, these are not real society. So you need to analyze the text as the text first before then talking about something else. So that's the answer for question number one. As Dr. Izil mentioned, it's related to the second question about new criticism. Well, I agree that maybe it's not enough. So we're not promoting new criticism here, but we are sort of promoting close reading. So close reading, close watching, close playing. Because when we are talking about new criticism, so again, it's the early 20th century. So it's from 1930s to 1960s. And some people say that new criticism is already dead after that. But I would like to remind you that Robert Longbaum, American author, once said, also professor, once said that he pronounced the new criticism, quote, dead of its very success. Why? Because he said we are all new critics nowadays, whether we like it or not, in that we cannot avoid discerning and appreciating wit in poetry or reading with close attention to words, images, ironies, and so on. So there is more to criticism than, quote, understanding the text, which is where criticism begins, not where it ends. So I think the main contribution of new criticism is actually the act of close reading, because it actually provides us with devices to actually understand the text before then talking about everything else about the text. So basically, it's where criticism begins, not where it ends. So we start with close reading before then talking about other things, about psychology or sociology or Marxism or whatever it is. So that is my answer.
Thank you, Ibu Etta, for a complete, thorough and complete response to why we should still learn with a close reading, because this is the very idea how to build a deeper understanding upon others. And we still have other questions. This is from Ibu Wati. Dr. Izul and Dr. Etta may read from the chat, but the question here is that to learn about a poem, I guess, to get it to be more interesting, is there any strategies, method, or suggestion in approaching the poem itself in order to get closer with the ideas, messages, or even words? I think that this is really important, the sensitivity or any feeling, to get a very good interpretation or predictions. Dr. Izul, Dr. Etta, would you like to share your, let's say, strategy or method to learn about poem? Yes, I guess this is the last question from the chat box.
You know, go first, Etta, or
Okay, yeah, for how to make poem more interesting, because again, and we need to start by close reading the poem, but if how to make poem more interesting is actually by relate the elements, the intrinsic elements of the poem with the extrinsic elements of the poem. So that's why when we stop with new criticism ideas with intentional fallacy, affective fallacy, so probably, again, it will not be interesting. But actually, in my poetry class, I try to involve the students to love poems more by asking them to also look at the context of the poem and also how it relates, the content of the poem, how the content of the poem relates to their own lives and also their experience, life experience, not only life experience that they experience themselves, but also experience that other people experience. But yeah, so we cannot stop, again, we cannot stop with close reading, but we need to start with close reading. So analyzing all of the intrinsic elements of the poetry and then take them out to real life. That's, I think, basically what I can say.
Thank you, Ibu Etta. Dr. Izul, anything to say about how the method to, what is it called, to make the learning of not only poem maybe, but also literary works today become more interesting?
Yeah, so I guess I agree with Dr. Etta here, and I think something that I would like to add, and I mean, if I had more time, I actually would like to talk a little bit more about that, is that in digital humanities, or in actually, I guess in computational humanities, there's a method that's called distant reading. So you have close reading, and you now people are introducing in digital humanities called distant reading. So distant reading is more like a data analytics, like computational analytics method, that essentially you have this large corpus of text. It can be poetry. So for instance, one of my favorite poets is Emily Dickinson. So for instance, with Emily Dickinson work, you actually do data mining of all Emily Dickinson's poetry, Emily Dickinson poems, and then you do computational analytics to look at like creating a text cloud, sort of like what are the words that she uses most often? What are the metaphors that she uses more often in her work? What sort of kind of like structure that, so you look at it not by close reading, by reading her poem closely, but you take a distant reading by collecting amount of data and then look at the pattern using computer analytics. So that's I guess another way in thinking about studying literature becoming more interactive or more interesting, I guess, in this case. So I guess that's all from me. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Izul, and thank you, Dr. Etta, for a very valuable presentations and very inspiring. I find a chat here would say this is a very mind-blowing discussions. It is, because it gives us inspirations, and I also read some of the response over there that because of this discussion, they would like to study, I guess, only one statement itself. It becomes very valuable also for having this discussion this morning. So, well, everyone, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I'm really sorry. I have to say, this is the end. I'm hoping that we are having more discussion on this very dynamic issues and topics in learning literature and media studies. Somehow, the time is not quite friendly for us today to end up the discussions. Again, Dr. Izul, on behalf of the institution, I would like to say thank you very much. And also Ibu, Dr. Etta, for sharing the knowledge to all of us.
The pleasure is
The
mine.
floor.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully we will meet again, Dr. Izul,
Hopefully
in other
we will meet in
discussions.
person.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for all of the participants. I would like to give the screen to the Master of Ceremony, Pak Royde.
Okay, thank you so much for the moderator who helped us guide today's presentations by the expert speakers. What a very insightful presentation. Thank you, Mr. Zulkarnain Iskandar PhD from Hubert and William Smith College, and Mrs. Etta Farmacelia Nurul Hadi SSM, whom MA PhD from Diponegoro University. I personally learned a lot from it, and I hope others do as well. And we hope that by the end of this webinar, the participants will learn something new. The next agenda is signing implementation arrangement as symbolic sign from the head of Sasastra, Mr. Dr. Suryadi M. The time is yours.
Terima kasih Mbak Radia. Terima kasih Bapak Iskandar Zulkarnain PhD yang telah banyak memberikan ilmu yang sangat luar biasa kepada juga Bu Etta. Ini sebagai bentuk implementasi regimennya. Kami mohon terima kasih Bapak Izul. Semoga akan terus berkelanjutan menjadi joint research. Terima kasih. Bapak Izul. Dan sekaligus ini Bapak Izul kami serahkan kenang-kenangan untuk sertifikat. Semoga ini menjadi tali asih dan terus berkelanjutan. Kami mohon untuk diterima Bapak Izul.
Amin. Diterima.
Terima kasih. Saya kembalikan kepada MC.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we finally come to the end of today's agenda. Let us close the seminar by reciting Alhamdulillah together. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin. To start the agenda we have presented to you all this morning. We hope you learned something new. Thank you so much for your attention. See you next occasion. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
wabarakatuh.
Terima kasih Bapak Izul, Mbak Eta,
Terima kasih
Bu
Pak
Yaning,
Izul.
dan semua peserta webinar. Semoga ketemu lagi di lain kesempatan. Terima kasih.
Ya.
Thank you. Thank you, Izul.
Thank you, Eta. This is fun.
Yeah, it is. See, I was
Menyenangkan, Pak
excited
Izul.
and yeah, betul, betul.
Sangat mendasar dan kita semua butuh begitu untuk diingatkan lagi, di recharge lagi gitu. Jadi terima kasih sekali.
Sama. Ya. Saya sign out ya.
Ya,
Mohon
thank
izin.
Terima kasih
Ya,
Ya,
Bapak
ya.
Izul.
iya.
Ya.
Thank
Terima
you.
kasih.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.